So, like, I think I chose to go into the field of software at an objectively odd time. I actually wasn't, like, a super fan of computers, and I know that advice is, like, don't go into computer science unless you really like it, because you're probably going to get abused or something along those lines. I might be paraphrasing a little. But yeah, I hated computers. In fact, in like the one coding class that I had in high school, I got a 0 on my final assignment for plagiarizing back when that was a thing. But I think what fully put me down the path of computers was we had like an ex-banker who had been working at Goldman Sachs for like 15 years come into a talk. And it was an hour long, but 45 minutes of his talk was focused on his tattoos and his spirituality and his like awakening after realizing one day that just preparing PowerPoints and doing DCFs all day probably isn't very meaningful work and doesn't bring a lot of fulfillment to one's life. So I guess that in a way, my career choice was like an ego trip to establish like a high ground, which is kind of funny. That being said, I do actually like software and computers, and I have overcome my fear and distaste of programming after that bad experience in high school. But I've definitely been navigating a lot of interesting social situations, I guess you could call them, that I wasn't fully anticipating. Not to say that you're going to anticipate most of the things you go through, but for a career that wasn't supposed to be super social and was a lot more about kind of figuring things out on your own with intermittent help, and like it wasn't fully built on just collaboration the whole time. It was built on a lot of like exploration and figuring how to build things yourself. Yeah, it wasn't something I was expecting, but I was navigating LinkedIn like a year or two ago. I think that's when kind of the rhetoric really picked up from people outside of the software space, where they were, there was a lot of C-suite executives that were posting on LinkedIn saying that the software dev job is like gone, or it was some sort of software adjacent role where it was a scrum master or someone who hadn't really done much dev work in a long time. So it would be like Andy, who's like 50, and his only programming experience had been writing a single VBA macro in like Excel 2008. And now he's got the certifications to speak on what's going on. Not to say that you need to be qualified to share any sort of opinion. I think that's overall an elitist take, especially given that my family history was from areas that were fed propaganda. So I think that whole establishment of needing to have certifications to talk about anything is a little odd. But I guess what I'm really trying to say here is that there's still influence there, because these people are, again, executives at sometimes pretty big companies that young professionals look up to, because to be completely blunt, most of the people on LinkedIn aren't people with like established careers. They're mostly people trying to find their next form of employment, but just in a more quote-unquote organic fashion, because all of the job boards are now fully like AI automated for ATS screening, and some of these people's resumes might not pass the test, so they see that organic leads are better at landing jobs. So again, that information is being fed to people who are like haven't been part of the workforce ever. And some people get pretty scared, because I mean, seeing one message or another post here or there is one thing, but it was pushed pretty like heavily by whatever algorithm LinkedIn had set up for, I think, a lot of people. So that led to a bit of a divide where a lot of people dropped out of like computer science and software related fields and jobs and university and college programs. But for the other half, or other portion that didn't drop and decided to go, I guess, double down on their conviction that computer science is a good degree for the future. I guess most of them decided to hide behind, or not most of them, but I think a lot of them are going to end up stumbling across like the Vim, NeoVim, and Emacs productivity workflow gods, because those people always tend to have pretty pessimistic views about AI's whole outlook and impact on the dev job, because they think that if they know all 160 lines of their ZSH config file, their job is essentially future-proofed, which I can see why they would take pride in that. So that seems pretty impressive, but I don't think that would change whether Cursor can create an entire repo for you and give a bunch of functionality for a web app. So a lot of the people leading the charge there, like Luke Smith, I know Sylvan Franklin's a newer one. I've been all interested in like looking at his videos and stuff. He's kind of the guy who introduced me to all of this over-optimized buffoonery, I guess you could call it. And you might be wondering, what qualifications do I have to be commenting and making such bold claims about the entire landscape as a whole? Not that I've made any claim yet, really. Well, I'm a computer science student. And as far as I know, Sylvan, the guy I just brought up, he's a math major, and Luke Smith is a technical writer. So I think it would be an overstatement to say that either of them have done any meaningful dev work. Even if they have done some dev work, they are doing dev work. So I guess we're kind of on an even playing field in that sense. But a lot of the workflow demons, other than maybe Sylvan, like to push this narrative of needing crazy productivity and a bunch of macros to really do what you need to do. I guess now would be a good time to show that I did fall victim to the propaganda, at least for a little. So I have a split keyboard, and I'm on campus. Like, I'm not at home. So I decided to make a public venture out into the world with my split keyboard, which is a little funny. But I did all this, and I really hope that not many people will follow suit into this rabbit hole of over-optimizing their workflow and setup. I mean, I used to over-optimize stuff even before I was interested in computer science and all that. Notion's a good example of ways people over-optimize outside of the, I guess, profession. I, for one, was an Obsidian fan because he used Markdown, and I was a goon. I was like, oh yeah, Markdown's something, I don't know. But I think that Sylvan's following growing pretty quickly in the past couple of weeks has maybe, in my eyes, been an indication of a lot of people in the dev space moving into trying to over-optimize their setups because they see that AI is getting to a point where it's doing a lot more than people anticipated. But I do think it's a good reminder to push the people that they don't need to over-optimize and have Ghosty with 25 different managers, like terminal shells and all this, to do any, like, shell prompts to do any sort of meaningful dev work. It's all just a bunch of garbage over-optimization, really. The people that I know, and I think the people that they know too, that do some of the best work, are the most productive devs they know, use like vanilla Vim. And that they don't have like Fuzzy Finder or like Telescope or anything like that. Like, no crazy plugins where they're over-optimizing and have a lot of features they don't really need. So if you want to use VScode, use VScode. If you want to use IntelliJ, use IntelliJ. If you like Java, don't use Eclipse. Eclipse kind of sucks. But there probably are like Eclipse demons who've been using it for like 30 years. That being said, don't force yourself to use outdated software because you think that it's going to give you more ownership over your code. If you want more ownership over your code, stop over-optimizing your like terminal config or your NeoVim config and start actually optimizing your brain and writing meaningful code. And not telling Claude to write the same app for the fifth time.